Hi everyone, my name is Anyedu Dobong and I'm a regional lead on the developer ecosystem team at Google. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Anyedu and welcome to Between the Brackets on the developer ecosystem team at Google. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Anyedu and welcome to Between the Brackets. Feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat and we would love to know where you're joining from. My name is Anyedu and welcome to Between the Brackets. Feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat. We would love to know where you're joining from. Feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat. We would love to know where you're joining from. Okay. I'd like to kick off with an introduction to Between the Brackets. So Between is a monthly web series where we host experts and Googlers and talk about niche topics on Google products and technologies. You can check out the website for more information on the schedule of topics we cover specifically. This year, we'll be covering web and Flutter, Firebase, cloud, AI and ML, all through the year. We're thrilled to have you join us today, and we hope you'll enjoy the show. A bit of housekeeping for today. As this is a great guideline for all our events, we'd like to remind everyone to be excellent to each other. To that extent, please follow all the community guidelines on our website and on the links we share below. Add your questions to the chat and be mindful of the questions you add, because those also need to follow our community guidelines. We're here to help you with your questions. If you have any questions, any concerns at all, you can share with us at btb-team@google.com. So, all right, let's get it started. Today's episode will host two amazing experts. And they're here to tell you about building a Firebase-backed application using Next.js. You can ask your questions during the show directly, right there in the comment section, and we will address them in a timely manner with the speakers. And so, welcome. I'd like to introduce our speakers, Jeff and Alex. Jeff, you want to go first?
Thanks, Anyedi. Hi, everyone. I'm Jeff. I'm a developer relations engineer on the Firebase team at Google. I see everyone sending in where they're listening from. So I'll tell you, I'm in New Jersey, USA. And if the chat could tell us, kind of interesting food or favorite food from their area. For me, I think bagels and pizza kind of win for New Jersey. So, we're right next to New York, and New York City is known for that too. So that's a favorite for me. But anyway, as I said, I'm a developer relations engineer. I've been working on all things web for Firebase for the last 5 or so years, including cloud functions and hosting, and also maintain our Reactfire library, which makes it easier to connect Firebase and React together. And I'm joined by an awesome GDE, Alex. Could you introduce yourself, Alex? Oh, I think you're on mute.
Sorry about that.
Classic.
I podcast every day and still muted. My name is Alex Patterson. I am the founder of CodingCat.dev, and I'm also a developer advocate and, of course, GDE for Firebase. So really excited to show off kind of some of CodingCat and how we built the backend with Jeff.
All right. And a favorite food from your area?
Ooh, yeah. I was thinking when you said that, my favorite food is pizza, but probably in the area, it's actually beer. Grand Rapids is known as Beer City, USA. It's won a crazy amount of awards. So
cool.
That's probably what we're known for.
Nice. And pan pizza, right? That's the pizza.
I think pan pizza or like deep dish pizza is more Chicago, so Chicago style pizza. I don't know if Michigan is really known for that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Fair question.
Well, awesome. And it looks like in the chat we've got people from all over, from Florida to Ghana, Senegal, Arizona, Egypt, Romania.
It must be pretty late in Ghana, I would think.
Yeah, probably, right?
Holy smokes.
Well, thanks for joining wherever you are and whatever time it is. All right. Well, we're here to talk about a few different things, but mostly CodingCat.dev, which is a website that you've built. And and a kind of general service that you run to teach people about web development. Want to tell us a bit about what the site is and kind of what it does so that we can jump into the technical bits next?
Yeah, absolutely. So primarily what it is meant for is to kind of go through courses, and you can see some of our latest courses out here. So if I click into a course, you can see videos, and then there's typically code samples at the bottom, but a lot of these introductory type of videos, they don't have some of that, but you get the idea. We can either host, basically we usually host a YouTube video if it's kind of open like this, and then some of our closed courses you need to be a member for. So that is kind of where the Firebase side of this kind of kicks in. So we'll get into that in a little while. But yeah, there's courses, tutorials around all kinds of varying subjects. Especially enjoy this one for the Firebase Summit. That was not that long ago. Unfortunately, couldn't go in person still. I'm really looking forward to in-person conferences.
Same.
And then we also, every week we do a podcast with someone awesome in our community for the web development community, and we host all of our podcasts out here as well. So that's kind of the gist of it. There are some blog posts that are just more generic type of material if we cover something without a kind of a tutorial or something like that. You'll notice though, as I'm kind of clicking through different things, it's coming up like fast, and that's on purpose. This is actually an older build. We've improved some of the speed improvements on this too, and we can talk about like how that actually works with Next.js and how this is all laid out.
Yeah, so I guess like first of all, and by the way, chat, we're going to get into the technical content now. So if you have questions, please feel free to ask, and we'll do our best to answer. So at a really high level, you're building a website. Why do you care that it's fast?
Yeah, that's a great point. So I remember this statistic from Amazon. It was many years ago now, but how many millions of dollars they would lose because when people click into their website, if it was like longer than 2 seconds or 3 seconds, you can see a steep like decline on like click-through rate. So when someone comes to your site and they just can't get it to load quick enough, they'll just leave. Like they're not even interested with the pain of like getting around. So it's very important to provide that kind of static feeling, and we can talk and break down what static kind of build means, but it's very important to have that speed, or otherwise people don't want to stick around your site, and it's a painful UI UX experience too. Like on the UI side, if you're not showing images correctly and they're not loading correctly, that's painful from a UX or user experience side of things. If I go to click a button and it like jumps around, like that's a problem too. It's really nice to just have everything loaded up in there.
Yeah, absolutely. And even like as somebody that's lucky to have a really fast internet connection at home and at work on a fast computer, there are still times when I'm in the store and for some reason my phone has a really bad connection and sites take forever to load. So I think performance is important to everyone.
Couldn't agree more.
So how do you measure performance? Like maybe we should start there.
Yeah, so the best way that I know of, so you can do it in your own tools if you want to run those, but the best place that I know is pagespeed.web.dev. So if I drop ours in here, if you have a site, and maybe I should have picked a more popular site. If you have a site that actually has a lot of users on it, it actually has a lot of data that will come up. And maybe I could pop open another one here real quick. So if you do like apple.com, let's say. I should probably do Google. This is a Google thing. But you'll see here that immediately these scores are coming up because it's been tracked over time. And so you're seeing kind of the general web vitals of that page over time on both mobile and desktop. And so if I look at CodingCat, the mobile side in this build still has a couple interesting Firebase things that we can talk about if we want to later on. Mm-hmm. On the desktop side, you'll get that like nice 97% score coming in because of the static loads.
Nice.
There are some tools surrounding that, and we can dive into them as we go, but through your what's called CI/CD pipeline, if you will. So That's the continuous integration, continuous deployment. You can put a tool in the middle there that actually runs the PageSpeed score. And if it's over X certain percentage, it will say, nope, this build fails. Like, let's not go any further. And then we kind of move into the next round of like iterating and trying to make that performance better.
Oh, very cool. Yeah, and some other tools that you can use to measure performance are a Lighthouse, which I think you mentioned is like a local tool you can run to see how your website loads on your computer. And also I know Web Page Test is a pretty popular one to run your site on real devices. Cool. Well, we know you built the site. We know that it's fast. Our talk is supposed to be about Next.js and Firebase. So why did you pick Next.js?
So Next.js for me, I grew up Angular. If like there's Angular fans out in there, but it became very difficult to create like statically rendered sites, and so gradually, as React kind of got adopted and became more like mainstream, and then like grew like mad and took the world over after a while. Next.js kind of spun out, and they were looking for a way to get easily rendered server-side pages. And so I think Tim and some other folks at Vercel, which used to be Zeit, back when all this was going on, they were looking for a way to like put their documentation up, still write it in React, but have it like very performant. And so they started writing Next.js back then. And when they created it, it allows React to run both on the server side and on the client side after it rehydrates. So the great part about that is we can give it all the data it needs on the server side, and we can actually produce static content too, which is just pre-built content that we can ship up to the CDN, and then the CDN can cache that content so that whoever around the world is trying to hit that content, it's closest to them and they can pull that down. And so you don't get any speed impacts where it has to go from, let's say, Asia to your hosted server in Eastern America, Virginia, somewhere like that. You don't get that lag or that delay, and it doesn't also have to make the hops into the CMS as you go along too. So the fantastic part about that is when you're creating those pages, you can make some decisions too. So let's say you have a highly like application-based page. You could leave that on the server side, whereas the rest of them, like blog posts and things like that, you can leave those all statically generated too. The cool part about Next.js is that there's also this thing called incremental static regeneration. So when you get into that, you can actually create a static page, but if you don't want to like say like what's a popular newspaper I'm thinking of?
Washington New York Post? Times is right next to here.
New York Times, perfect. So if you look at those, they have millions of pages, and to statically generate those would be a long time.
Yeah.
So ideally, what you want to do is either pick some of your top posts or like use some calculations to determine what those top posts might be. So if you're running like analytics and you know people are hitting your top 1,000 pages, let's say, and it really tails off after that, you can start to mark those pages in like your CMS or your database or wherever you're pulling that data. And you could say, always statically generate these at build time and then leave the rest. Like you don't have to after that. And so if you hit a page that is not statically built, it will actually say, oh, wait a minute, I'll go statically render it and bring that back and then cache it on the CDN so that it's fast for the next person that hits it. So that's kind of the ISR side of the story. So talked about like static SSG, SSR, ISR, like all those fun acronyms. Did I miss one?
I think you got it. I think another common use of ISR is e-commerce, right? Like, you might have thousands of products and you don't want to rebuild every single page on your entire site every time you change a price or add a new product. But, maybe you do need to regenerate pages that have changed in price or are new or something like that. And that's another good use case of not having to build everything all at once.
And actually in Next.js 12.1, which we're now running on our main site, they've introduced the ability to revalidate pages as well. So when you create these static pages, often on Next.js, you'll put like, I believe we have an hour set for ours. Like anyone that hits it within an hour time frame, it's not going to go grab anything new.
Mm-hmm.
But as that kind of time comes up, let's say you caught a spelling error in your post and you're like, oh no, like I don't want to wait an hour and everyone reads my post incorrectly. So you can update that and on the database side or the backend side, and then you can revalidate it. So you can send it the path and say, hey, go kill this CDN cache and go do the thing where it looks up the static content and rebuilds that page. And you can do that just for a single page. So that's been a lifesaver for us, moving to 12.1. I know it's still technically in beta, but it's been working really well.
Oh, very cool.
So
nice. Well, we covered a lot of acronyms,
Yeah.
ISR, SSG, SSR. If anyone in the chat is lost in our alphabet soup, feel free to ask at any time what any of these things mean.
Yeah,
we're happy to talk
absolutely.
about it more.
The alphabet soup, right, of web development.
Yeah. So maybe we could like real quick talk about the differences between a single page app, a statically generated site, and what Next.js does, which is kind of somewhere in the middle, or it's kind of either or somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, so it's kind of interesting when you think about Angular or especially Angular or like create React app when you just kind of generate that way. Those applications, what they're meant to do is serve the entire app up into the browser all at one time and load up all the JavaScript and pieces that you need to run that application. And then once it's up there, you usually use JavaScript based routing in there too, which you can technically use like the browser APIs at this point as well to kind of tie that in. But when you're bouncing through pages, you're not necessarily hitting statically driven pages and the HTML doesn't exist in another location. It's still kind of serving it up all from a single location that it knows how to route back to. So that's kind of the idea of single page application. Whereas when we talk about Next, which gets a little interesting to your point, like it kind of can do both of these things. Most of those static pages, when they rehydrate, you don't have to do much to them. So like if you have interactivity, which we'll talk about on the Firebase piece of this, and you need users logging in, you can have that statically driven page, but then in areas that you need an authenticated user, for instance, on that side, what you can do is wait for like the Firebase authentication to kick in and like change the page in some way or some fashion. So that's kind of the advantage of having both.
Yeah. So maybe like a fair summary might be for a single page app, you're shipping to the client like a pretty empty HTML document with a lot of JavaScript that then spins everything up and makes a lot of HTML.
Yeah.
And for static generation or server rendering, you're sending kind of fully formed HTML to the client that can be shown right away by the browser, and then the JavaScript can spin up in the background and add an interactivity later.
Yeah, I think that's somewhat fair. I think there's a difference on kind of creating static HTML completely where it's served, and then Next.js has kind of a flavor of that where it actually has like JSON in there building out those pages. So you're still shipping the JSON, and it does have to hydrate, but like there's all those pieces. So yeah.
Yeah, and hydration, like it's like a sponge, right? Like you're sending a dry sponge to the client, and that's pretty useful.
Yeah.
And then you kind of send the water later, and in that case, it's the JavaScript kind of hooking into all the HTML you already sent and that's already rendered, and the page can become interactive a little later so that people see stuff first before the whole JavaScript.
That's an amazing way of looking at that. I've never thought about the sponge analogy.
I think it fits with the whole hydration water thing.
Yeah, and at Builder.io, Mishko, who invented Angular, he's also created a new framework called Quick, which is pretty awesome too, because Quick actually will take and instead of doing that rehydrate where it does have to hook into all those actions, they're actually shipping complete HTML with kind of like little snippets to tie back into, like hashes, let's call them. And those hashes, once everything's loaded, if you don't need JavaScript, it doesn't download JavaScript until you need it. And so that's kind of, it's interesting. It feels like that next phase, like Solid.js and Quick and a few others are like starting to get into that side of things. I just saw the SpongeBob call outs. had a laugh. Good one, Joe. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, that's good. The SpongeBob theory of web development.
That's awesome.
Cool. And yeah, I know we recently rewrote the Firebase blog with Astro, which is another framework that leans towards, as little JavaScript as possible and mostly HTML and like islands of interactivity when you need them. So
I can't remember when you guys did that, what framework, because Astro is kind of, I'll call it framework agnostic. You can do many of them. What one did you guys go with?
I think it's mostly Preact.
Okay.
But the cool thing about Astro is that you can use a bunch of different ones. So, if we want to write a blog post about React specifically, we could use React for components in that post, or, Solid.js, or whatever else we want to use.
Nice. I'm just going to pop, since we're talking about Quick, I'll drop the Quick link over there in the comments.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Cool. So where do you want to head first? Do you want to check out the back end and kind of page structures, and like maybe you have questions on that and then talk about Builder, or do you want to do it the other way?
Yeah, time's flying. I think we talked a lot about creating, generating HTML and sending JavaScript to the browser, but we haven't talked about like where the actual content lives and how it gets, the important stuff, like how people sign in, what people are reading, where that lives. Do you want to talk about where the data for CodingCat lives, like what Builder does and what Firebase does for you?
Yeah, absolutely. So from a builder perspective, and we should probably dive into it in a minute because it's hard to like conceptualize this, but Builder basically takes different components and allows you to visually lay them out on your page. And so you can design entire pages, and what happens, it's also a CMS. So it's a visual editor and a CMS all kind of wrapped into one. And what you can do with that is when you're moving components around, at the very end of all of that, what basically happens is it creates and it stores JSON at the end of it. So you can then take that JSON and read it in, and it will have all of your even React components built into that JSON, so that your backend application knows how to render that as well. So it's really kind of wild to think about and talk through. So maybe we should show it off a little bit.
Sure. Yeah, let's jump in.
Okay, cool.
And while Alex is pulling that up, maybe in the chat, can you let us know if you've ever used Next or Builder or Firebase and what you've built with them if you have?
Yeah, for sure. I saw one question out here. Yeah, there we go.
Oh, yeah. How does Next compare for bandwidth use compared to client-side rendering? Seems like it's kind of like doing PHP and JavaScript. You want to take a shot at that?
I'll take a shot at it. I don't know if I have the perfect answer for this, though. So the Next.js framework itself does get shipped when you actually ship up the pages. So as far as comparing it to client side, that's a tough one. So the client side rendering, usually in a single page application, there's a lot more there that you have to load up. When you actually just ship just static pages out of Next, it should be a lot smaller. But again, you have to load the framework because it has all those hooks still. So seems like it's kind of like doing PHP and JavaScript. Yeah, that's kind of an interesting way to look at it. Instead of the PHP, though, you're doing React and Next. So that's kind of your backend and front end language. So everything's in JSX. But yeah. That's an interesting way to look at it.
Yeah, and I think let's see if I can add anything. Like it is kind of like PHP where you're doing some rendering stuff on the server, but you mentioned like all the hooks and stuff. So the bandwidth hit of Next is, along with the HTML that's generated already, it is sending like a JSON blob to add some data to the page and like a runtime with React to spin everything up once it does get to the client. So
yeah,
it's definitely not as like svelte, or I guess that's the wrong word since svelte is a JS framework, but it's not as trim as like just sending pure HTML with PHP.
Yeah, and technically, I mean, if you were to render entire pages on your backend, like with PHP, and then just use raw JavaScript up on the client side to run everything, I would guess it'd probably be smaller, but it's also DX wise probably pretty painful to write as well. So coming from that experience way back in the day, probably talking 20 years ago when I was writing PHP, that definitely was harder back then. And jQuery like solved a lot of that mystery for us back then. And now we've kind of come to some of these newer frameworks.
Yeah, and a lot of what these newer frameworks are trying to do are like make it easier, like you said, DX, like developer experience, make it easier to do the right thing. And while also making it, you only need one language. You can write JavaScript or TypeScript on the server and the client. The frameworks try and Next even kind of, sometimes it's a blur of where your code is even running when you write it, which is good and bad. It's kind of magic, but sometimes it's too magic, at least in my experience.
Yeah, it takes a minute to like realize part of those.
Yeah.
Okay, let's dive in and I'll show you. So the easiest way, if you're ever like working on Builder, that I think is the Builder plugin. So it's actually going to highlight areas on your page and allow you to like click into the correct page that you're on. So this is technically a header component, so you can do sections in Builder, and then this is a page component down here. So I'm going to go ahead and click this edit button, and it's going to drop me directly into Builder. If I wasn't logged in, I would have to log in at this point, but now we're in the Builder application, but we're looking at my website as well. So this is actually pointed to builder.codingcat.dev, which is a true like domain, and it's very fast. You can also switch this out and put localhost here to do more development type of work. So the cool part when you're messing around with Builder though, you can drop things in and have some fun custom components. So we'll drop in like Casey. So if I drop in Casey, that is actually a React component that I just pulled over and dropped in. So there's some more. And those are automatically going to be on the page the next time the static gen occurs for that. And if I run this localhost, so if I go over here to localhost, I have the dev server up and running. There's often, you know what? It's not published. That's why. Let me switch the URL real quick. Yeah, so I can either view it out on the site using kind of this cache busting URL that we have, or I can view that on localhost so that I can do more development on my server.
And so I guess you have a Next.js server running in the background. Is that what you have, or is there a Builder client? Okay.
I do have Next.js. Yep. So here's the code and here's the server running. So it's just npm init or npm run dev on the back end there.
So it seems like then as a developer, you can work in kind of normal Next.js world, but then if there's like a marketing person on your team, they can come and take some of the components you created and move them around themselves.
Yeah, exactly. Right? And they can design whole pages. So what's cool about having these pages set up like this, when you come into it, you can actually take and do different versions of it too. So depending on targeting, like say you pulled someone in from some marketing page that is all about Angular in my case. When I hit that Angular one, I could actually swap out my front page, and this could all be about Angular at this point, and like drive them kind of that way and kind of iterate on that targeting every time I want to deal with it. So you can do a lot of nice A/B testing that way too. So there's built-in heat maps that you can look at from Builder too, and all kinds of like tools like that.
Cool.
So I did want to show you, like, when I talk about that JSON and what that actually looks like.
Mm-hmm.
It's sometimes hard to like conceptualize this a little bit. So let me go over here. So this is the actual code that's going to come in from this page. And there's going to be this part, which explains all of our blocks. It's actually trimmed down from the full block because there's so much information that comes across. So you're getting kind of a smaller preview version of these blocks. If I click on a block though, I can now see that block's full data. So it's telling it that I have a React component called AJ primary, and it's listing all the styling and everything else that's required for it.
Cool. And then you have like a Next.js component somewhere that pulls in that JSON and then knows what to do with it, right?
Yeah, exactly. So there's a React component that's a builder component, and we'll take a look at that. You'll have to forgive my code because there's some complexity going on here. So things are wrapped on other things, but
We're looking at a real site.
Yeah, exactly. So here's the actual like builder component coming in. And we can talk about all these other things above it here, but I just want to show you. This is as simple as it is. Like you can drop that builder component in anywhere and it's going to render the correct pages. That's the cool part about Builder.
Nice. And so since this is happening on the server in Next.js, I guess it's also not a big performance hit to pull down this big JSON blob and parse it and stuff, right?
Yeah, exactly. So if I take, let's just look at kind of page layout for those who have never seen a Next.js app. Try to make this, it's so giant on my screen. So in pages, this basically specifies a route. So if you're used to using a single page app and that client side routing, you'll typically have like routing files for like the React router or Angular router. And you'll have to actually specify these within that. And then the JavaScript knows when you hit that route, what to do after that. Next's approach is you actually specify the routes within this directory. And so if I want to go to, let's say, our podcasts and see the listings, here's that listing page. It's the first index page that comes in here. And this correlates to this page right here. So this is the index page with all of the posts on it. So the cool part here, when I take a look at that, there's actually this content coming in. So this model data right here, if I were to take and look at model data, get static props, there it is. So if I take a look at that, when that comes through, it's actually going to provide all of the data from this JSON. Oops, I closed it. From this JSON, the total file here. I promise I'm going to quit saying this JSON. Here's the entire tree of JSON that comes in. So that data is actually provided by Next, and it's going to look that up on the server side to build this page as it goes along. Does that make sense, Jeff?
I think so. And get static props is a Next.js function that's run at build time, right? So that's when you want to statically generate your site, meaning you run next build in your terminal and you want to generate a bunch of pages, right?
Yep, exactly. And often when we kind of talk about that ISR piece too, that's going to happen up on like AWS Lambdas, essentially up in the cloud. Do the cloud quotes, and it's actually going to do the same thing up there. So it's still server side generating or statically generating it on a server, on a microservice essentially. It'll do that on your page, and then it provides out the same data as if you run next build locally. So it's kind of one and the same. So it's going to go out and fetch all of that required data and bring it back in.
And I guess the advantage of doing it in a cloud function somewhere is you could have it like watching a GitHub repo or something and have a bunch of builds firing off at once, kind of.
Yeah, absolutely. So every time someone pushes, it'll do a new build and you can get all those static pages. You can also do it like when your CMS updates. It could do a completely full build if you wanted to. I've seen sites do that too. I wouldn't recommend that on like the New York Times version of the million page site, but there's a lot of those that can do it.
Great.
So once you have kind of that model data, there's actually some other data in here that becomes a little interesting too. So let me see if I can do our little trick where I've got the builder plugin. I click the edit button.
Oh, and we've got a question popped up on our screen,
Yeah.
actually. Is the Next.json readable by search engine bots? You have any experience with SEO for CodingCat with Next.js?
Yeah, so the JSON side of that actually gets rendered before any like bot would ever see it. So you're actually going to get the same SEO experience as a statically generated page. So like if I run anything on what I love to show off, and maybe this is interesting for folks. If I go to Facebook debugger, you put in an address out here. This does a really good job of showing what's scraped for this page. So it has the raw, like here's the OG images that it's picking up and things like that. But you can also go right here and it'll, whoa, usually this works. Interesting. So it usually will show you kind of the entire page that came up. So back in the day when Google was not like running pages, JavaScript and getting SEO, this was really, really important. It's probably not as important now, but I still feel like it's much easier for all of the different search engines to go pick up your SEO. So if I actually open this directly and just do view page source, this is typically what you're going to see or what a search engine will see out here. So it's all of this fun stuff.
And this kind of big JSON/JavaScript blob at the bottom is Next.js's initialization metadata, basically, right?
Exactly. So when we were kind of looking at that page, this props right here, well, that's probably impossible to see for you guys. So here, I'll try to zoom in like crazy. I don't know if it's...
Yeah, that's good.
Okay. So there's at the very, very top, you'll see props coming in. And when we take and look at this field in here, that's this right here. That is where your props end up. So all of the different props coming in for like site, let's say with our page links, they will come into that prop for it.
Cool. And that object does come, but Next.js also sends the fully rendered HTML, right? And that object is just for wiring up the hydration.
On the static version, it does, but it's still going to have to process this JSON.
Which will be a bit of a time to interactive hit, right?
Yes. Sorry, I just read AMP and like, I hope AMP dies. Like personally, I'm sorry if I've offended you at all, but AMP is brutal. Like it shouldn't have existed the way it did. And I think they're backing off of it pretty rapidly at this point.
But for somebody who is trying to support it for now,
yes.
Like, do you know?
So Next.js, last I checked, supported AMP. I know there's a couple GitHub issues out there surrounding certain things. So you can write AMP in Next.js. I don't know how well supported it is, and I don't know how well it will be supported in the future either.
Okay.
But there is a great, the cool thing about Next.js, there's a great GitHub discussions feature. So if you're ever curious about this, you can bring it up in this discussions area, and it is very lively out here. You will get a ton of responses back. So, so here you go. Here's your AMP ads and AMP page, AMP stories. Like there's all kinds of stuff out here about all different things on Next. So everything it covers. So I don't want to like say don't use AMP because it's one of the cool tools out there, but it's also frustrating too.
Cool. And what's frustrating about it? Like I don't want to start any rants, but like just as a web developer, what's been tough?
I'll probably get kicked off the rest of these Google things if I talk about it. But the real trouble is that it's more in the search engine optimization piece. So when you start to talk about like AMP getting higher priority because it's faster and like uses its own JavaScript and things like that, it's like, oh, wait a minute, like the web's supposed to be open. Why are we moving AMP pages up to the top? So it's more around that side of the house, not necessarily the technology itself.
Okay, cool. Well, that's great feedback. Like, it's important to talk about the trade-offs for everything we work with, right?
Yeah, absolutely, for sure.
Cool. So yeah, thanks for those questions. Want to talk a little bit more? I think you were getting into more about how you wire things up with Next.
Yeah, absolutely. So basically, we've kind of covered the layout portions of this in a page. Anytime you need to access data on that server side, it requires server side, so like Node.js SDKs. That's really important to remember. So a long time ago, and I probably should bring up the the old branch we have, I was actually using Firebase as my backend as well. So I wrote this entire like admin panel where you could drag and drop posts around and move all kinds of things all over the place. Essentially Notion, but not as good of what I built. So I ended up taking that down because it's hard to keep up with the backend when all you want to do is create content for people. So, but with all of that said, you always have to remember when you're running things in Git static props or Git static. Let me get in the right page here. So Git static props or Git static pages is probably further down. Here we go. Git static paths. So if you're running anything, and this is kind of where things get tricky, at least mentally, for your model as you're writing Next.js. So Git static paths and Git static props are both in the same page as the rest of your code. So here is the rest of my React code or JSX down at the bottom. And this is going to run on the server side and the client side. So you have to keep that in mind as you're going through this, even though those other functions only run on the server. So when you're dealing with, let's say, Firebase, for instance, Firebase SDK for Node.js, you would actually initialize completely differently with a private key that you don't want to release out to anyone. You would do that on the back end so that it can render all of that side of it. For the front end, it's totally cool to have your public keys exposed and everything like that. So you're actually running another instance, not like equally, but an instance of the client side once it's on the client. So hopefully that kind of illustrates for people like the difference there of the mental model when you're in a single page creating both back end and front end data like that.
Yeah, and one thing to keep in mind, I know for Firebase, is the Firebase admin SDK has access to everything in your database. It doesn't obey security rules because it's meant to be run in a trusted environment like a server, whereas the client SDK follows Firebase security rules, so it's easier to lock down your data and make sure only the people that should be able to read and write can read and write. And it can get tricky with Next.js to, if you accidentally do a read with the admin SDK, you might expose some data you didn't mean to, and that can get a little tricky. So we're working on trying to make that a little bit better, mostly by making the client SDKs more runnable on the server. But right now it's I know it's a little bit of a gray area, a little tricky.
That's really cool. I believe it's been a minute, but HTTP callable functions, you could actually use the SDK there and pull all of your model data or whatever data you want through the API. What's nice about that is you can actually tell it what user is there. So even though like for statically generated pages, that probably doesn't make sense too much because you want to like access the data as if you were no one. So admin wise to build the page, but then you could set up like APIs out in the front end if you wanted to call back through there. And you could ship that user up to kind of that cloud function itself running, and then you would know that user to access data. So of course you could also do that completely client side as well, just using real-time database, or Firestore is probably the more recommended version at this point.
Yeah, they each got their strengths, but
yeah.
But yeah, callable functions are great because they include the auth context. And we actually have a new project that was announced at Google I/O, Firebase Framework Tools, which is an attempt to make it easier to deploy Next.js apps and other these server client hybrid frameworks onto Firebase and not have to juggle so much yourself. So we're going to try and handle the auth state between those, for example, like you're saying.
Yeah, I haven't dug into that a whole lot yet, so it's kind of interesting. I'd love to learn more about that.
Cool.
I was thinking, I'm gonna double check real quick. Something that you helped me work on. I want to see if I still have that around here. Let's see. Oops. I think I do. I don't know if it'll run or not, but we can try. Oops. Folks, if you ever run npm run, you can get a list of your run commands.
Oh, I type npm ls sometimes because I feel like that would print it out for some reason, but npm run. Today I learned.
Okay, I think I'm in the right directory now. I'm going on a little bit of a tangent here, but let me kill my other server. The only reason I'm doing this is because the code is a little more simple in this demo. Just to take a look at how Reactfire, so Jeff's package, I don't know if you want to do a better segue than I'm about to, but Reactfire is kind of a Firebase wrapper. Take it from there.
Yeah, so Reactfire is a library I've been working on for a couple of years now to make it really easy to use Firebase inside React apps. So it does a few things. It helps you manage the initialization of the Firebase SDKs because there are some times where you have to do some settings only once and then you want to use the SDK later, but you don't want to change the settings again. It also works with React 18's concurrent rendering features. So if you want to use suspense and render a fallback while your client is connecting to the real-time database or Firestore, you can do that. And it has some other hooks for auth and stuff like that. So yeah, that's my rough intro to Reactfire. If you are a React developer and use Firebase, give it a shot.
I'm trying to see if there is another branch that I'm missing because it's throwing a weird error that I haven't seen before.
While you're looking into that, I'll post a link to my talk I did on Reactfire a few years ago now, but it's still mostly applicable.
That sounds awesome. I haven't looked at this in a minute, but what I wanted to kind of show was how Reactfire can wrap different data. So let's see if I can find this real quick. Cat admin, cat ID. I think this is it.
All right, so there's a Reactfire hook, right? Use Firestore doc data.
Yes, there we go. There's one of them. I was trying to find kind of how we brought in data and then it took off from there. Oh, this is it. Okay, cool. So you could probably break this down better than I can, but I'll try at the start and then you can help me out here.
Let's do it. Yeah.
So the cool wrappers, if you're using React, these are called hooks. And essentially what that hook is going to do, it provides state that you can capture. So Jeff built out this beautiful package that makes this a million times more simple. If you did not have this in React, it would try to continuously re-render and go grab and create a new Firestore. And it's like, I can't do this. And so this makes it a million times easier to just grab the Firestore that you want. This is also using version 9. So you'll notice things where you're actually providing Firestore back into the doc. It used to be kind of reversed, but this is that new modularity that we get to lower package sizes.
Yep, and doc is just part of the Firebase SDK itself, not Reactfire.
Yes,
but it was part of a big push for us to make the SDK more modular so that it would be a little bit smaller, you could pull in what pieces you need.
Yeah, and so essentially all we're doing here on this database is we're going to the cats. I wish I could show this now. I'll have to figure out what was wrong with this. So we're going into the cats Firestore collection and grabbing a specific cat. You'll notice that when we pass into this card, though, there's this thing called server cat. And this is the Next.js part I want to like make sure we take a look at.
Mm-hmm.
So if I go back over to cat ID, when we run this, we're creating get static paths is going to create all of the different paths for each cat. So like black cat, white cat, red cat, whatever they might be. And then we run through those and create all the necessary pages for it.
And this is all on the server, right? Or at build
all
time?
on the server, yep. So everybody just remember get static paths, get static props, all server side still. And so this is where that server side SDK piece for Firebase comes into play.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we're in get static props, what we end up with after we go search our collection and our docs correctly, at the end of this, we actually get a cat. So here is cat coming through, and this is just data, like JSON data that's coming across. But this is the key to what we return to Next.js at this point. So I used to put these at the bottom and now put them at the top. Okay, so this is the only React piece in this whole code. I mean, roughly saying.
Mm-hmm.
So the rest of that, it's all functions building up the data. We got the data and it passed that JSON as cat right here into the prop. So the prop cat comes in, and then we use that cat as server cat in our cat card. So this card usually has like a cat picture and stuff like that on it. You'll notice we call this server cat because that is already static data coming as we built the page.
Mm-hmm.
So we can use that data within this use Firestore doc data as our initial data. So we're set up and good to go with this page. It's got all the information. We built it statically. And now once that page comes live and that whole rendering happens, Firebase actually can pick up and say, oh, okay, like that was cool. You built that static page for us, but that data is kind of old at this point. Why don't you go fetch a new set of data now that we're up here off that same cat reference and go get it. And so it will actually apply the rest of the data to our cat card as well. So that's kind of the cool part about how we can hook into using Firebase on the front end.
Yeah, and I could imagine like if this is a page where everyone's posting pictures of their cat all the time, like it's great to be shown a list of cats right away, but it's even more fun to like watch new ones pop in as the page is there.
Yeah. So like if you think of Twitter, if you get that first instant, here's Twitter, and then it's now got the little load more thing on it. That's the whole idea is like, okay, now keep going and getting more as it comes in real time. So hopefully that's a good indicator of how we use this.
Yeah, definitely.
So I want to also talk about, so that's cool from the data perspective. And you can do that same thing if you're storing your data like in a CMS and then you want to add to it. So you could actually use something like, you don't want to load your authors till after the page loads or something like that. You could use your CMS data to populate all of your SEO niceness, the entire page, build that out, and then pass that ID over, or comments is probably a much better example of this. Put the comments ID out there and it'll go fetch comments live at that point. So you'd have your full static site and then comments would start rolling in real time, which is a great demo example. We're going to have to create that one, I think.
Sounds good to me.
I'll be down in Miami next week. You should come join me.
That's right. IO extended, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Nice.
Let's see here. Okay, so we covered all those pieces. Firebase also comes with a million other things, right? Okay, maybe not a million, but a lot. So
I think you mentioned auth, right? Like you use auth to gate some pages behind paid content.
Exactly. Yep. And there's two ways to do that again. But let me show you what's required for Reactfire first. So on the Reactfire side of things, there's also the capability of all of these different providers coming in. And so if you're used to Firebase, we have things like Performance Provider, which gives you great telemetry coming in from your application, and you can pull all the performance pieces. Firebase Analytics. Firebase ties directly into Google Analytics. I think that's the name now. What are we on? 4?
Yeah.
Is that what it's called?
GA4. Yep. Google Analytics 4.
I always get thrown off on that. And then we also provide an auth wrapper around it. And then, of course, Firestore and functions too, which are a couple things that we've already talked about. So to dive into the auth side of this, so we could actually do our pages 2 different ways. And we were doing it 2 different ways when we first started. Do I actually have a good example of this anymore? No, because we made all of our courses free now. So if it were locked, you actually get a locked page on these at the very front of it. I'm trying to think if I can mock one up quick, but I don't think I can with 3 minutes left.
Yeah, we could talk through it real quick.
So there's the idea of a locked page client side as well. And so we've kind of moved to that, accepting the fact that if you want to hack like React, you want to hack Firebase, you want to hack Firestore, and finally like get through all those layers and then see our content live, we totally allow you to do that now in CodingCat, just to keep things simpler. But when we load those locked pages, so let's say for instance, this were locked, this page right here. Oh, look at that. Never mind. We do have it. Okay. So I forgot this is the old version. So on this page right here, this is all that we create statically for our lessons. And you would always see this locked page and no other data. And like I said, it's client side, so you could hack it and find all the video URLs and fun stuff. But if I were to sign in, which it's probably not going to let me do because it's on a weird domain, but when I sign in, it actually would take over client side and we would look at that auth to put it through. So if I go look at our post media, for instance, that's just the lock. Sorry, I'm losing track. There's a layout. Let's find out where this is used. There we go. Okay. So here's an example where the post media, that's
I see example. It's the Reactfire hook there.
Yeah, exactly. So what we're doing here on Reactfire is because we have our entire application wrapped with the auth provider on everything, we can actually use these hooks in whatever page that we want to. Just realize that hooks cannot change once they are accepted. So that's something that you have to kind of get your mind around as you're building React components. So when we do this, we actually get the user back. And if the user is there, that's when we send our full page content. Otherwise, we will keep showing you that big lock that I just showed you. So hopefully that's kind of an indicator how you can use auth. There are a few more things that are tied into ours because we actually see if you're a member and things like that. And that's the Firestore piece. So it checks if you're authenticated, are you in our members list as a subscriber? And then finally it will let you in.
Very cool. And I think you told me when we talked about this another day that you use Stripe for payments. And I just want to throw out a quick plug for the Firebase extension that lets you integrate Stripe and Firestore together. It's just, with 1 minute left, thought I'd mention that.
There are some amazing new extensions, Jeff. I was just thinking about maybe I'll do a tutorial on every extension out here now because I think that would be cool.
Well, that'd be awesome. See how many you can throw into a single app.
I was just thinking like an app per extension. I don't know. Like it gets too confusing if you put it all together, I feel like.
That's true. You could have a simple little app that just really exercises the extension.
Yeah. So the payments with Stripe, amazing for us. Essentially when people log in, it creates a customer on the Stripe side. And then with the new like Stripe, can't remember what it's called, the new page that you can go out to, it takes care of the rest. So if you pay for a subscription or a product out there, it will take care of that. And it actually pushes a webhook directly back into Firebase. And the cool part about that is the extension has already created all those. So I'd love to show this off. I know we're running tight on time, but let me just show it real quick.
Sure. And I think we got a comment from Tsaba saying we should have a part 2 of this. So cool.
Happy
Appreciate
to
the
jump on
feedback.
anytime.
Glad you're finding this valuable.
Did they move extensions? Am I missing it?
Yeah, they got moved up into the build section.
Wow.
Right. Yeah.
Totally missing it. Okay, cool. So the great part about extensions is how many APIs it creates. So how many cloud functions it actually takes care of. So it actually creates 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different functions to take care of everything. And I didn't have to write any of it, which is like, thank you. And that's the whole idea around extensions. So write as many as you want. There's a whole community around it. I was part of the alpha program and we got that thing up and running, and Stripe was probably the first major one I saw in there, which is amazing.
Yeah, they've been an awesome partner and keep adding new features too.
Yeah. Awesome. I know we're up on time. Is there anyone have more questions?
Yeah, anything we can answer? I knew we flew through a bunch of stuff right at the end there.
I did see a comment at some point. I was scrolling through there. Detroit style pizza is a thing. I always say, no, it's not, but I was corrected. There is a Detroit style pizza. So that could probably be one of the food items on top of Beer City, USA.
Nice. That uses brick cheese, right? This is something I learned about recently.
I believe so. See, this is how much I don't know. Well, I don't see any more flowing in. We can probably wrap it up. Happy to do a part 2, by the way.
Cool. I think so too. This was really awesome. And I feel like when we start diving into acronyms, we start taking up way more time than I realized. So
yeah,
it was great to talk through all of it. And thanks for being here, Alex.
Absolutely. Anytime. Really appreciate the invite and happy to show off anything Firebase, especially when Jeff sends me Sparky. So.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, wow. Thanks a lot, Alex. Thanks, Jeff. You were an amazing host.
Thanks. It was fun.
All righty. Well, thank you, everyone, for joining Between the Brackets today. Hope you all enjoyed this episode. We'd like to request that you fill out the feedback survey in the follow-up email you receive, and also shown in the link on your screen right now. That's goo.gle/btb-survey. We'd like to get your feedback so that we can improve the show along the way. Also, if you are following us or if you are posting on social media, the hashtags Between the Brackets, you can keep track of what we're doing and share how you enjoyed today's show and how the show was for you. For our next episode, we'll be having our next episode next month. And we'll be giving you more information about that episode. I hope you signed in on our website and are you already subscribed to our YouTube channel. If you have any questions, please feel free to email us at btb-team@google.com. We're looking forward to hearing from you. Looking forward to seeing you next month. Till then, take care and stay safe. Thank you.